Okay? Let us continue. Okay, let us discuss yung Article 12 ng Civil Code. Each one of the solidary creditor may do whatever may be useful to the others, but not anything which may be prejudicial to the latter. Kaya kung ito yung solidary creditor natin, if this is the solidary creditor, okay, sabi di ba, each of the solidary creditor may do whatever may be useful to the other, but not anything which are prejudicial to the latter. Eh ano ba yung example ng mga okay, beneficial or useful to others? Okay, answer is demand. Okay, whether judicial or extrajudicial. Kaya pag halimbawa si A nag-demand kay X, okay, even without the demand of BC, it will put X in a legal delay, whether demand is judicial or extrajudicial. Ngayon, pag si A, for instance, ay nag-demand kay X ng judicial demand, okay, even without demand on the part of BC na judicial, it will stop the running of the prescriptive period. Okay, tandaan ninyo, okay, to put the debtor in a legal delay, okay, the demand can either be judicial or extrajudicial. Okay, however, to stop the running of the prescriptive period, okay, the demand must be judicial. In other words, you cannot stop the running of the prescriptive period by mere extrajudicial demand. Kailangan it must be a judicial demand. Okay, eh ano naman yung mga act ng each solidary creditor na prejudicial? Okay, example is condonation or remission of debt. Halimbawa, okay, si A, kinondon okay ni A yung entire obligation kunwaring 90,000 in favor of X. Ang effect niyan is that the entire obligation is extinguished. Kasi nga solidary creditor sila. Pero since yung act ni A ay prejudicial kay BC, liable si A na bayaran si BC nung kanilang share na 30,000 each. Okay, under 1213 naman, sabi dyan, a solidary creditor daw cannot assign his right without the consent of the others. Kaya halimbawa si C, hindi niya pwedeng i-assign ang right niya kay third person without the consent of A and B. Kasi ang reason dito, it might prejudice the interest of A and B. Kasi kung halimbawa yung third person dito negligent, madadamay si A and B. Kasi di ba kapag solidary, the act of one becomes the act of all. Okay, Article 1214, the debtor may pay any one of the solidary creditors. But if any demand, judicial or extrajudicial, has been made by one of them, then payment should be made to him. In other words, class si X dito, pwede kong bayaran si A, pwedeng si B, or pwedeng si C. Because they are solidary creditor. Pero ang sabi ng batas, pag si A daw nag-demand na kay X, whether judicial or extrajudicial, then payment must be made to A only. Kasi pag ang binayaran dito ni X ay si BC, the rule is that the payment is not valid. Okay? The payment is not valid. Ang valid payment lang dyan, okay, yung share lang ni B or C. Kasi halimbawa, 90,000 yung obligation dito, tapos si X ang ginawa, nag-demand na si A kunwari kay X ng demand. Okay, kunwari, judicial or extrajudicial, dapat ang bayaran lang ni X si A. Pero ang binayaran niya si B. Kaya lumalabas, valid lang siya to the extent ng 30. Kaya si A pwede pa rin mag-demand ng 60,000 kay X. Ang recourse ni X, habulin si B, okay nung 60,000 for overpayment. Okay, punta tayo sa Article 1215 ng Civil Code. Okay, sabi ng 1215, novation, compensation, confusion, or remission of debt made by any of the solidary creditors or with any of the solidary debtors shall extinguish the obligation without prejudice to the provision of Article 1219. Sabi dyan, the creditor daw who may have executed any of this act, as well as he who collect the debt, shall be liable to the others for the share in obligation corresponding to them. By the way, may binanggit ditong mga mode of extinguishment, di ba? Novation, compensation, confusion, okay, or remission of debt. By the way, ano ba yung novation? Novation is a mode of extinguishing an obligation by either changing the object or principal condition. Pwedeng ano to pinaltan mismo yung object or principal condition, or pwedeng substitution ng debtor or subrogating in place of creditor. Okay, yung novation, meron akong separate discussion dyan. Punta tayo sa compensation. Compensation is a mode of extinguishing an obligation, okay, wherein two or more debtors in their own right are principal debtors and creditor with each other. Kaya kung may utang ako sa iyong 50,000, may utang ka rin sa aking 50,000, quits tayo. Okay, example. Okay, ABC are solidary debtor. Okay, liable sila kay X for 90. Ang problema si X, liable din kay C for 90 in his own personal capacity. If this is solidary obligation, ang effect, the entire obligation is extinguished because C can represent A saka B. Okay, ang recourse dito ni C, mag-ask ka ng reimbursement kay A and B ng 30,000 each. Okay? Okay, another illustration. What if joint siya? Okay, A, B, C are joint debtors. Okay? Liable sila kay X for 90. Pero si X liable kay C for 90,000 in his own personal capacity. Ang effect nito, mag-o-offset lang siya to the extent ng 1/3, which is 30. Kaya liable pa rin si X kay C for 60. Tapos si A naman, liable kay X for 30. Liable si B kay X for 30. Sapagkat this is a joint obligation. Okay? Hindi pwedeng i-represent ni C, si A and B. Okay, now punta naman tayo sa confusion. Okay? Confusion or merger of right. Okay, example, A, B, C are solidary debtor kay X for 90. Okay, ginawa ni X, inassign kay Y, then Y assign back to C. Now, if this is solidary obligation, solidary debtor, C can represent A and B. Kaya ang effect niya, the entire obligation is extinguished. Ang recourse dito ni C, habulin si A and B ng 30,000 each for reimbursement. Okay? Now, let us modify. What if, okay, confusion or merger siya, pero joint debtor. Okay, A, B, C are joint debtors kay X for 90. Okay, inassign kay Y, then Y assign back to C. Okay, pagbalik niyan kay C, ang extinguish lang niyan is only to the extent of 1/3. Kaya yung 60,000 na balance, pwedeng ma-enforce ni C kay A and B ng 30,000 each. Pero hindi siya okay for right for reimbursement, but for the enforcement of original obligation. Kanina kasi right for reimbursement ito hindi, enforcement ng original obligation. Kasi hindi naman extinguish yung entire obligation, only to the extent of 1/3 lang. Okay? Now, sabi mo, sir, parehas lang yan, ay hindi. Magkaiba sila. Kasi yung kanina is right for reimbursement, ito, enforcement ng original obligation. Okay? Sabi mo, parehas lang 30-30. Nagkataon lang yan. Let us modify. Paano kung halimbawa dito si A is insolvent? Wala ka mare-recover kay A. How about kay B? 30 lang. Kasi walang pakialam si B sa insolvency ni A. Pero kung ito ay solidary obligation, solidary debtor sila, insolvency A, wala ka marirecover kay A. Pero makakakolek ka kay B ng 30 plus 15,000. Kasi yung 30,000 na share ni A, i-absorb siya ni BC. Okay? Yan ang distinction niya. Okay, now let us proceed now sa remission naman. Okay, ano ba yung remission or sometimes we call it condonation of debt? Halimbawa, A, B, C are solidary debtor and okay, X, Y are solidary creditor for 90. Ang ginawa ni X, kinondon niya yung entire 90,000 in favor of A. Anong effect? Since X can represent Y, A can represent BC, the entire obligation is extinguished. Now, ang first question is that, can A ask reimbursement kay BC? Okay, the answer is no. Kasi ang sabi ng batas, pag nagkaroon ng total condonation in favor of one solidary debtor, it will benefit all of them. Kaya hindi ka entitled for any reimbursement. Eh, how about si X? Liable ba siya kay Y for the 45,000? Okay, the answer is yes. Kasi ang sabi natin, each of the solidary creditors may do whatever may be useful to the other, but not anything which are prejudicial to the latter. Since yung act dito ni X, prejudicial kay Y, liable siya kay Y ng 45,000. Okay. Next, let us proceed now sa 1216. Okay, sabi ng 1216, the creditor daw may proceed against any one of the solidary debtor or some or all of them simultaneously. The demand made against one of them shall not be an obstacle to those which may subsequently be directed against the others, so long as the debt has not been fully collected. Kaya kung halimbawa A, B, C are solidary debtor, pwedeng habulin ni X si A ng 90, pwedeng si B, pwedeng si C, pwedeng AB, pwedeng BC, or pwedeng all of them simultaneously as long as the debt is not fully collected. Kasi kung halimbawa si X nakakolekta na ng 30 kay A, pwede niyang balikan si A for 60. Or pwedeng habulin niya si B, or pwedeng si C, okay, or pwedeng AB nga lang, or pwedeng BC, or pwedeng all of them simultaneously. Okay, because they are solidary debtor. Each one of them can represent the other. 1217, sabi dito, payment made by one of the solidary debtors extinguish the obligation. If two or more solidary debtors offer to pay, the creditor daw may choose which offer to accept. In other words, yung payment ni A kay X na 90 or payment ni B or payment ni C ng 90 will extinguish the entire obligation because A, B, C can represent each other. Pero if there are two or more solidary debtors offered to pay daw, may option ngayon si X. Either i-accept niya yung payment ni A or i-accept niya ang payment ni B. O, yan yung Article 1217. Okay, Article 1217, paragraph 2, ito tinanong na sa CPA board exam before. Sabi diyan, he who made the payment may claim from his co-debtors only the share which correspond to each. Okay, with interest daw for payment already made. If the payment daw is made before the debt is due, no interest for the intervening period may be demanded. Okay, illustration. ABC are solidary debtors kay X na creditor for 90. Assuming ang due date nito is August 15, 2020. However, one of the solidary debtors C, binayaran yung entire obligation as early as June 10. Now, ang question is that as of June 10, 2020, can C ask reimbursement kay AB? The answer is no. Kasi wala namang benefit on the part of A and B because the obligation is not yet due and demandable. Ang recourse ni C, habulin si X kung meron siyang payment by mistake. Pwede kang mag-recover dito ng payment together with interest. Pero kung hahabulin ni C, A and B, the answer is no kasi walang benefit to the other solidary debtor. Pero pagdating ng August 15, 2020, the obligation now is due and demandable. That's why C may now ask reimbursement kay AB ng 30,000 each. Pero makaka-recover ba si C kay A and B ng interest starting June 10, 2020 up to August 15? The answer is no. Kasi nga, walang benefit on the part of A and B. I repeat, kung gusto mag-recover ni C ng interest, habulin niya si X kung meron siyang payment by mistake. Pero let us assume, okay, what if nagkaroon ng date of reimbursement ng August 30. Okay, kung August 30 nagkaroon ng reimbursement, makaka-recover si C kay A and B ng 30,000 each plus interest starting August 15 hanggang August 30. Kasi simulang August 15, magbe-benefit na si A and B dyan. Kaya makaka-recover si C ng interest kay A and B starting from August 15 up to August 30, 2020. Okay? Pero take note class, tingnan nyo maigi to. Kung halimbawa, si C, nagkaroon ka ng payment dito kay X, hindi June 10. Sabihin natin ng August 20. Tapos ang dito reimbursement August 30. Makaka-recover si C ng interest kay A and B, okay, starting August 20 hanggang August 30 lang. Therefore, to summarize, if one of the solidary debtor pay the entire obligation before maturity date, makaka-recovered ka lang ng interest starting from the date of maturity up to the date of reimbursement. Pero pag ang payment ng solidary debtor, okay, is after maturity, katulad ng August 20, okay, makaka-recovered ka ng interest starting only from the date of payment, which is August 20, up to the date of reimbursement. Okay, yan yung second paragraph of Article 1217. Yan, natatanong yan sa CPA board exam. Okay, ito naman, when one of the solidary debtors cannot now because of insolvency, reimburse his share to the debtor, paying the obligation. Such share shall be borne by all his co-debtors in proportion to the debt of each. Okay, yan yung sinasabi ko sa inyo, kapag ang isang solidary debtor naging insolvent, yung share ng insolvent solidary debtor, a-absorb lang siya ng remaining solidary debtor. Article 1218. Ito natanong na rin sa CPA board exam to. Sabi dyan, payment by a solidary debtor shall not entitle him to reimbursement from his co-debtors if such payment daw is made after the obligation daw has prescribed or becomes illegal. Kaya halimbawa, ABC, okay, are solidary debtor kay X for 90. Okay, ang problema, kung kunwari, yung obligation ni ABC kay X prescribed na kasi kunwari kung written contract, lumagpas na ng 10 years. Okay? Kaya lumalabas technically the obligation of ABC to X is already extinguished by prescription. Kaya insofar as man-made law is concerned, ABC are no longer liable kay X. However, even though the obligation is prescribed, si binayaran si X. Hindi ka raw makaka-recover ng reimbursement kay, okay, kung halimbawa si A dito nagkaroon ng payment ng 90, prescribed na. Hindi siya makaka-recover kay BC ng reimbursement. Kasi nga, the obligation is already prescribed. Kasi ang reason dito is that walang benefit on the part of BC because the obligation is already extinguished by prescription. Ito pa lang yung natatanong sa board exam, yung prescribed. Ito wala pa yung illegal. Kasi halimbawa, ang obligation ni ABC kay X, okay, 90,000 worth of cigarette. Okay, later on, there is subsequent law passed by Congress na nagkaroon ng prohibition ng cigarette. Absolute ban kunwari. Kunwari lang, nagkaroon ng absolute ban. Okay, ang effect is that the obligation of ABC to X is now extinguished by loss of the thing due. Kasi di ba pag sinabing loss, okay, anong sabi ng batas? A thing is lost when it perishes. Physical loss yan. Second, it goes out of commerce. Meaning yung object now dineclared ng subsequent law to becomes unlawful. And number 3, okay, when the thing disappears, whose existence is unknown or it cannot be recovered. And I'm referring to civil loss. Ito, illegal. Kaya lumalabas, nagkaroon ng legal loss. Kaya lumalabas, ABC are no longer liable to X. Pero ang problema, si C, voluntary, nagbayad pa rin kay X ng 90,000 worth of cigarette. Hindi siya entitled mag-ask ng reimbursement from the other solidary debtor. Kaya dalawa yung binanggit ng Article 1218. Bali, prescribed na yung obligation or subsequently naging illegal siya. Okay, now let us proceed now sa partial condonation naman. Sabi ng Article 1219, the remission made by the creditor of the share which affect one of the solidary debtors does not release the latter from his responsibility toward the co-debtors in case the debt has been totally paid by any one of them before the remission daw was effected. Example, ABC are solidary liable kay X for 90. However, si X ang ginawa, kinondon ang share ni A, okay, nung 1/12/2020. 30,000 lang. Ang problema si C, binayaran si X ng 90,000, okay, nung 1/14/2020. Kaya ang question dito, can C ask reimbursement kay A? Okay, the answer of course is no. Why? Okay, because the share of A is already extinguished by condonation. Okay, kasi kinondon ni X yung share ni A as of 1/12. Kaya lumalabas ang existing obligation na lang dito, 60. Eh nagbayad si C kay X ng 90, overpayment ka ng 30. Kaya ang right of recourse dito ni C, habulin si B for reimbursement ng 30 at habulin niya si X ng 30,000 because of payment by mistake. Pero let us modify. Baguhin natin yung date. Punta tayo sa another illustration. ABC are solidary liable kay X for 90. Si X ang ginawa, kinondon ang share ni A, okay, nung 2010. Okay, hindi ko lang nabago. Dapat should be 2020. Okay, tapos ang problema si C, binayaran naman si X ng 90 nung 1/14/2020 rin. Okay, baguhin mo 2020. Okay, ang question is that can C as reimbursement kay A? Okay, the answer is yes. Why? Kasi yung condonation ni X in favor of A nung 115 is ineffectual because as early as 114, the entire obligation is already extinguished by payment. Kaya there is nothing to condone on 115. Ineffectual yung condonation ni X in favor of A on 115. Kasi na-extinguish na yung entire obligation on 114. Kaya C can ask reimbursement ng 30 kay A and of course 30,000 kay B. Okay, next, another illustration. Ito naman yung total condonation nga. Legal basis. Article 1220, the remission of the whole obligation obtained by one of the solidary debtors does not entitle him to reimbursement from his co-debtors daw. Example, ABC are solidary debtors kay X for 90. Okay, ang problema si X ang ginawa, kinondon in favor of A, yung entire obligation. Anong effect? Okay, A can represent BC, that's why the entire obligation is extinguished. Okay, ang question is that can A ask reimbursement kay BC? Okay, of course, sabi ng 1220 is no. Kasi pag nagkaroon ng total condonation in favor of one, okay, any of the solidary debtor, it will benefit all of them. Kaya hindi ka entitled for any reimbursement. Okay, now Article 1221 naman. Punta tayo dito sa loss. Okay, nung thing due. Sabi niyan, if the thing has been lost or if the prestation has become impossible without the fault of the solidary debtors, the obligation thou shall be extinguished. If there was fault on the part of any one of them, all shall be responsible to the creditor for the price and the payment of damages and interest without prejudice to their action against the guilty or negligent debtor. If through a fortuitous event daw, the thing is lost or the performance has been impossible, after one of the solidary debtors has incurred in delay through the judicial or extrajudicial demand upon him by creditor, the provision of the preceding paragraph shall apply. Illustration. ABC are solidary liable kay X to deliver a determinate 9,000 sacks of rice on June 30, 2020. Okay? Ang problema, pagdating class ng July, sabi natin July 2, the entire object was lost by a fortuitous event. Anong effect? Obligation ni ABC is extinguished. Why? Kasi yung determinate object na lost by fortuitous event before the debtors incurred legal delay. Kasi wala naman kung binanggit na may demand, kaya walang legal delay. Pero let us modify. Pagdating ng, what if on June 30, 2020, si X nag-demand kay A na mag-deliver? Pero walang delivery. Pagdating ng July 2, the entire object was lost by fortuitous event. Anong effect? Okay, co-convert yan into monetary obligation for damages. Kasi sa delay sa part ni A is also delay on the part of BC. Because the delay of one is the delay of all because they are solidary liable. Okay, now let us modify. Paano kung halimbawa ito ay joint debtor? Kung joint debtor to at nag-demand si X kay A namang delivery. Okay? Pero walang delivery on June 30. Pagdating ng July 1, the entire object was lost by a fortuitous event. Anong effect? Okay? Ang effect niyan, liable pa rin si A kay X. Pero only for 3,000 sacks of rice. Consists of 1/3 lang of the prestation. Pero yung obligation ni BC kay X is now extinguished by loss of the thing due. Because no demand, no legal delay. Pero kay A kasi, since yung object, even though na lost by fortuitous event, pero since may legal delay na, okay, liable pa rin dito si A. Pero corresponding sa share lang niya because they are joint debtors na. Okay? Based do sa okay modification na ginawa natin. Kaya tingnan nyo na lang ito sa problem. Ngayon, punta tayo sa Article 1222. Sabi diyan, a solidary debtor daw may an action filed by creditor avail himself of all defenses which are derived from the nature of the obligation, okay, and of those which are personal to him or pertain to his own share. Now, with respect to those which personally belong to the others daw, he may avail himself thereof, only as regards the part of the debt for which the latter are responsible. Okay, now meron kayong makikitang tatlong defenses na minention under 1222. Bali, itong una, derived from the nature ng obligation. Second is those personal to the debtor sued. And number 3, those personal to the others. Okay, unahin natin yung derived from the nature ng obligation. May example na mga derived from the nature ng obligation. Tulad ng number 1, lack of consideration, absolute simulation, illegal consideration, extinguishment ng obligation, or non-fulfillment ng suspensive condition if made upon the whole object or upon all debtor. Example lang. Okay, A, B, C are solidary debtor kunwari kay X 400,000. Okay, ang problema, lack of consideration pala. Alam natin na pag lack of consideration, the contract is void. Kaya ang tanong, may liable ba kay A, B, C, kay X? The answer is no. Zero lahat sila. Okay? Another is absolute simulation. By the way, under the law on contract, meron tayong dalawang klase ng simulation of contract. First, yung tinatawag na absolute simulated contract. And second is the relative simulated contract. Pag sinabi natin absolute simulated contract, it means the parties do not intend to be bound at all. Kaya ang status ng contract, void. Pero pag sinabing relative simulated contract, it means the parties consider true agreement. Kaya pag ang real agreement between the parties will not affect the interest of third person and not contrary to law, moral, good custom, public order, public policy, then the parties are bound by their true agreement. Ang problema, since absolute simulated contract to, void siya. Kaya, kung absolute simulated contract, may liable ba kay A, B, C, kay X? The answer is no. Okay, kasi nga, void siya. Another is illegal consideration. Di ba pag ang consideration is illegal, void rin siya. Walang liability kay A, B, and C, kay X. Kaya pag hinabol ni X, either si A, B, or C, magsiset up lang sila ng defense ng lack of consideration, absolute simulation, illegal consideration, or extinguishment. Ano example ng extinguishment? Payment kunwari. A, B, C are liable kay X solidary 400,000 nagbayad na si X. Si C kay X ng 100,000. Extinguish na. Kaya hindi na pwedeng habulin ni X si A sa si B. Kasi ang defense ni A and B dito, extinguishment ng obligation. Or another example is prescription. Kung prescribed na yung obligation ni A, B, C kay X, hindi rin makaka-recover si X kay ABC. Kasi nga, obligation of ABC is now extinguished by prescription. Another is non-fulfillment ng suspensive condition daw if made upon the whole object or upon all the debtors. Example, A, B, C are solidary liable kay X 400,000 if X passed the board exam. Ang tawag natin dyan, di ba, uniform solidarity. Hindi pa pumapasa si X ng CPA board exam, di walang liability si A, B, C. Kaya pag hinabol ni X si A ng 100,000, A can set up the defense of non-fulfillment of a suspensive condition, which is an uniform solidarity. How about yung pangalawa? Those personal to the debtor suit. Okay, covered dito, vitiated consent, incapacity to give consent, non-fulfillment ng condition imposed regarding his share, or non-arrival ng period. O those personal to the others. O illustration. Example, okay, A, B, C, D, E are solidary liable kay X creditor 400,000. Okay, di ba kung kayo si X, pwede kong habulin kahit sino. Pwedeng si A, pwedeng si B, pwedeng si C, pwedeng si D, pwedeng si E. 400,000. Pero let us assume that, nung hinabol kayo ni X si A, ito pa lang si A minor. Di meron siyang defense of minority. May makokolek ba si X kay A? Siyempre, the answer is 0. Wala siyang mare-recover dito. 0. Okay? Pero pwede niyang habulin siyempre ni X si B, C, D, E. Okay? Ang problema, nung hinahabol ngayon ni X si B, may defense din pala si B. Kunwari, insanity. Okay, may mare-recover ba si X kay B? Wala rin. Sapagkat complete defense yan kay B. Okay? Pag si X naman, hinabol niya si C, o di dapat ang liability ni C, 100,000. Pero kung halimbawa, meron siyang conditional pala yung obligation ni C sa share niya, gagawin dyan ni C, 100,000, ima-minus na yung defense na available kay A, minority, ima-minus din ni C yung defense na available kay B, na insanity, ima-minus din ni C yung defense personal to him, okay, na may condition, at kung itong share ni D ay due 2025 pa, ima-minus din ni C yung defense available kay D. Kaya may balance pa rin 20 representing the share of E, o liable pa rin si C for 20. Ngayon, pag ang hinabol naman ni X dito, kunwari ay si D. Ang gagawin din ni D, 100,000, ima-minus ni D yung defense available kay A, minority 20, ima-minus din ni D yung defense available kay B na insanity, ima-minus din ni C yung defense available kay C which is non-fulfillment of suspensive condition, at ima-minus din ni D yung defense available personal to him which is non-arrival of the period, kaya liable pa rin si D for 20 representing the share of E. Pero pag hinabol ngayon ni X si E, okay, lalabas dyan 100,000 pa rin, ima-minus naman ni E yung defense available kay A na minority, ima-minus ni E yung defense available kay B na insanity, ima-minus ni E yung defense available kay C na non-fulfillment of suspensive condition, at ima-minus naman ni E yung defense available kay D which is non-arrival of the period. Pero liable pa rin siya for 20,000 representing his own share. Kaya mapapansin mo, okay, pag ang hinabol dito ay si A, 0. Because minority is a complete defense. Pag hinabol naman niya si B, 0 din. Kasi complete defense din sa part ni B. Pero pag ang hinabol ni X si C, partial defense lang. Kaya ang gagawin nga lang natin, mahahabol pa rin ni X si C for 20 representing the share of E. Pero pag hinabol ni X si D, 20,000 pa rin. Pag hinabol ni X si E, 20,000 pa rin. O yan yung lumalabas na illustration sa Article 1222 ng Civil Code. Okay, another kind of obligation, yung tinatawag na divisible saka indivisible. By the way, pag sinabing divisible, it means the obligation are capable of partial fulfillment. Pero pag sinabing indivisible, it means the obligation are not capable of partial fulfillment. Kaya meron tayong tinatawag na kind of division, pwedeng qualitative, quantitative, or ideal or intellectual division. By the way, yung tong divisible and indivisible, hindi siya masyadong tinatanong sa CPA board exam. Okay, now let us proceed now dito sa kind of indivisibility. Okay, pwede raw siyang legal indivisibility, pwede siyang conventional, or absolute or natural indivisibility. Pag sinabing legal indivisibility, these are indivisibility created by law. Conventional indivisibility, these are indivisibility created by agreement. And absolute or natural indivisibility are indivisibility, okay, from the nature of the object or prestation. By the way, ito yung rule. Pag ang object by nature are not capable of partial performance, automatic na siyang indivisible. Hindi siya pwedeng maging divisible by agreement or by provision of law. Pero pag ang object by nature ay divisible, hindi siya automatic na divisible. Okay? Pwede pa rin siyang maging indivisible obligation by agreement or by provision of law. Okay, example, my obligation to you is to deliver a specific car. Yung specific car by nature are not capable of partial performance. Kaya automatic na siyang indivisible. Pero kung halimbawa ang obligation ko sa iyo mag-deliver ng 10,000 sacks of rice. Now, yung 10,000 sacks of rice by nature are capable of partial performance. Now, ang tanong, automatic na ba siyang divisible? The answer is no. Pwede pa rin siyang maging indivisible by agreement or by provision of law. Kasi kahit na 10,000 sacks of rice yan, pero kung ang agreement ninyo bawal ang partial performance, still the obligation is indivisible. Okay? By the way, ang general rule talaga, kung one debtor, one creditor yan, okay, that is indivisible. Kasi diba sa rules on payment, the creditor cannot be compelled to accept partial performance. Kaya dapat the payment must be complete. Okay? Ngayon, obligation to give a definite thing daw, kaya pag definite thing yan, and not susceptible of partial performance, the obligation is indivisible. Okay? Object, the execution of a certain number of days of work. Okay? Ibig sabihin kung per day siya, okay, divisible yan. Kasi nga, okay, by nature, capable siya ng partial performance. Or accomplishment of work by metrical unit, meaning per square meter, per square foot ang performance. Okay? Kung liquid naman by liters, okay, by gallon, okay, lumalabas divisible. Or analogous thing daw by nature are susceptible of partial performance. Pag obligation not to do naman, these are determined raw by the character of the prestation in each particular case. Okay, di yan masyadong pinapansin sa CPA board exam. Okay, and of course, yung last, last kind of obligation under the civil code, yung obligation with the penal clause. As to origin, may tinatawag tayong legal penal clause. Ito yung penal clause created by law. Conventional penal clause are penal clause created by agreement. As to purpose, pwede raw siyang compensatory penal clause or punitive penal clause. Pag compensatory penal clause, it takes place damages. In fact, ang general rule talaga ay compensatory lang. Kasi ang sabi ng batas, the penal clause substitute the indemnification for damage and payment of interest. Ibig sabihin, pag may penal clause na, wala nang damage in interest kasi papaltan lang ng penal clause yung damage in interest in case of breach. Pero sometimes, ang purpose ng penal clause is punitive. It means it imposes as punishment for breach. Kaya normally, pag silent ang problem, ang presumption natin is compensatory penal clause lang. It means the penal clause substitute the indemnification for damage and payment of interest. Another is demandability or effect. Pwede raw siyang subsidiary or alternative penal clause or pwede siyang joint or cumulative penal clause. Pag subsidiary or alternative penal clause, it means only the penal clause can be enforced. Pero pag joint or cumulative, both the principal and the penal clause can be enforced. By the way, pag silent ang problem, okay, ang presumption natin is subsidiary or alternative penal clause lang. Ibig sabihin, okay, kung meron ng principal, nag-perform na sa principal, okay, now, only the penal clause can be enforced. Hindi pwedeng mag-demand ka na ng principal, tapos enforcement pa ng penalty. Mamili ka lang. Okay, kaya siya tinawag na subsidiary or alternative penal clause. Pero sometimes the penal clause becomes joint or cumulative. It means pwede mong i-enforce both the principal and the penalty. Pero I repeat, nagkakaroon lang ng joint or cumulative penal clause pag may express stipulation. Okay, now, when damages must be paid? Di ba ang general rule nga natin is that the penal clause substitute the indemnification for damage and payment of interest in case of breach. Ibig sabihin, pag meron ng penal clause, wala nang damage in interest kasi pinaltan lang ng penal clause yung damage in interest. Pero ang question ngayon, meron bang instances na makaka-recover despite na meron ng penalty or penal clause, makaka-recover ka pa ng damage in interest? Yes. Number one, pag may express stipulation. Second, the debtor refused to pay the penalty. And last, okay, guilty of fraud raw in the fulfillment ng obligation. Meaning the debtor is guilty ng fraud in the performance ng obligation. Okay, yan yung tatlong instances na may damage na makaka-recover ka pa ng, okay, may penal clause na makaka-recover ka pa ng damage and interest. Okay, ano bang purpose ng penal clause? Number one, to substitute the indemnification for damage and payment of interest. And second is to assure compliance daw okay ng debtor. Okay, actually yung substitute for indemnification for damage and payment of interest, ito yung legal basis natin for saying that penal clause is compensatory. And number two, okay, to assure compliance ng debtor, ito naman yung basis natin for saying that the penal clause is merely alternative or subsidiary penal clause. Legal basis, sabi diyan, the penal clause shall substitute the indemnity for damage and payment of interest in case of non-compliance. However, penalty may be enforced only when it's demandable. Kasi pag ang principal obligation is void, automatic, the penal clause are likewise void because penal clause is just an accessory contract. The nullity of the principal follows the nullity of the penal clause. But the nullity of the penal clause does not follow the nullity of the principal obligation. Now, proof of actual damages suffered by creditor is not necessary daw to enforce the penalty. Okay? Now, kasi take note kailangan ko lang ng proof of pecuniary loss pagdating sa actual damages. Pero since ang penal clause in the form of a liquidated damages, hindi kailangan ng proof of pecuniary loss. Example, ang penal clause for instance is 100,000. But the actual damage suffered by creditor is only 80. Magkano mare-recovered na penalty? 100. The penal clause is 100,000. The actual damage suffered by creditor is 120. Okay, magkano mare-recovered na penal clause? 100,000 pa rin. Penal clause 100,000, actual damage ng creditor 500,000. Masyado nang malaki. Magkano mare-recovered na penalty? 100,000 pa rin. Okay, now, makaka-recovered ba ng damages? Answer, yes, kung nag-fall doon sa exception. Number one, may express stipulation. Second, the debtor refused to pay the penalty. And last, there is fraud in the performance ng obligation. Pero take note, kung magre-recovered ka na ng damages dito na actual, kailangan na ng proof of pecuniary loss. Ang hindi lang kailangan ng proof of pecuniary loss, of course, yung okay, penal clause. Kasi that is in the form of a liquidated damages. Now, the debtor now cannot exempt himself from the performance and to pay only the penalty except when expressly granted to him. Hindi raw pwedeng sabihin class ng debtor na I will no longer perform the principal obligation, I will just pay the penalty. Exception when the creditor authorize him to do so. Kasi if we will allow the debtor just to pay the penalty and he will no longer perform the principal obligation, para tuloy lumalabas, okay, yung penalty na ang principal obligation. Neither can the creditor demand the fulfillment of obligation and satisfaction of penalty at the same time. Yan yung basis natin for saying that penal clause is merely alternative or subsidiary. Kasi nagkakaroon lang ng okay, joint or cumulative penal clause pag may express stipulation. However, if the creditor choose performance but become impossible without his fault, the penalty daw may be imposed. Okay. By the way, meron tayong dalawang instances wherein the court is authorized to reduce the penalty. Number one, okay, when there is a partial or irregular performance, and second, okay, even there is no partial or regular performance, but the penal clause is iniquitous or unconscionable. In that case, the court is authorized to reduce the penalty, not to declare void, except of course if the penal clause is contrary to law, moral, good custom, public order, and public policy. Okay, now the nullity of penal clause does not carry of the principal obligation, but the nullity of the principal carries with that of the penal clause. Okay, just follow, okay, the doctrine of accessory follows the principal. Kasi halimbawa, ang principal obligation is 1 million. Tapos may penal clause na 10 grams of shabu. In that case, only the penal clause is void, but not the principal obligation. Pero pag ang principal obligation is mag-deliver ng 1 kilogram of shabu, tapos ang penalty in case of breach is 50,000, in that case, the entire obligation is void. Both the principal and the penalty. Kaya tandaan nyo, pag ang principal obligation void, it follows that the penal clause are likewise void. Pero pag ang void lang yung penal clause, okay, it does not mean that the principal obligation is void. Okay, stop ko muna dito. Okay, tuloy ko na lang for next meeting yung multiple choice. Okay.